is called Watching the Web Take Shape. And ultimately what it really is a session that talks about the trends that have emerged in structured content delivery on the web. What I'm going to do is talk about the web over the past decade and show some of the trends in structured content delivery that have taken place. Talk about what's emerged over the past couple years and focus in on some emerging technology that is available right now. And also kind of conclude with a discussion on where things are going. And what I really want to do over the course of this is have an interactive discussion. So if you have questions, feel free to shout them out as we're going. If you want to save your questions till the end, that's fine as well. But really, if you have a question while we're going along, shoot it out. So, like I said, I'm the chief technologist at Ektron. Ektron is a web content management company. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how people author content. And really, people author content in one of three modes. It's unstructured content, structured content, or semi-structured content. And let me give you a little example of each. So, structured content. What it is data with well-defined properties or attributes. So, an example, you can think of a press release as something that is very structured, right? It's something that has a title, it has an author, it has a company, the company that's issuing the press release, has the press release body itself. An address book contact is something that's structured. You have the person's name. You have an email address. You have various forms of contact information like a phone number, a fax number. Unstructured content is content that has no well-defined properties. It's data that, if you look at it, you really can't tell if it's a story or it's a blog post about, somebody's cat. It's an image. You can't tell looking at, the image whether it is, from a computer standpoint, whether it's an image of a flower or an image of a home. It's a page of text. Text is just naturally unstructured. It doesn't have any well-defined properties. Semi-structured means that you have unstructured text, but contained within that unstructured text, you have little bits of structure. So those are the three types of content, of information that I'll be talking about. Hopefully that explanation was clear enough and it'll make the ride a little smoother. So simple example, visual. This is my contact information. Looking at this, you can look at it and say easily that there's my name, there's my company, there's my title, etc. You don't really have to be a rocket science to look at this and immediately understand intuitively what the attributes are assigned with each piece of data. However, if you look at this, if I hold this up in front of your face for 3 minutes, you're going to have no clue what this is. You'd have no clue if this is a blog post or what. It's selling me some seeds for flowers, or if it's a diary entry. So, given those definitions, now let me talk about the state of the web over the past decade. So let's rewind. It's 1998, 1996. And the language of the time is HTML. Data-driven websites are starting to become the standard rather than the exception. And as such, you have all these applications that are taking data from a back-end repository like a database, pulling it out, generating all this HTML and spitting out into the browser. Oftentimes, that browser, the HTML that was being output was, pretty crazy because you had these tables nested inside of tables, and using, clear images as, means for ensuring that your presentation is going to look the same across your browsers. And the nutshell summary here is that browsers had to be extremely forgiving of the HTML that it would render. So the reality is, there was very little structure found implicitly in the content that was being delivered to web browsers. There was a little bit of structure, however, and there was a company that took full advantage of it. So the company was Google, and that little piece of structure was the hyperlink. So to get a clear understanding of the value of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Google and what they looked like at that point in time. So like I said, it's 1998. At that point in time, the search space was pretty mature. Yahoo was a well-established leader in the search space. Google at that time had just opened its doors. And its doors literally looked something like that. They were garage doors. And at that time, they were serving maybe a modest 100,000 queries per month. So nothing astronomical. Very small company, very modest amount of search queries being handled. And they were entering a space that was dominated by by companies that were very well established and had a high level of a large customer base that was very happy with the service that they were providing. Let's fast forward. Today's search landscape. Google, 2.7 billion queries per month. Yahoo, 1.7, almost 1.8 billion queries per month. And MSN, few hairs under a billion. And, the information here is dated April 2006, so it's a little bit out of date, but suffice to say that, something has happened between then and now. Google has emerged as a giant. What I'm not trying to do is make the naive statement that Google is what they are today because of the hyperlink. A lot of other things factored into that as well. But what I am trying to say is that back in the day, they focused on one thing exclusively. They focused on search. And they realized that, hey, there are these other guys out there that think that search is a solved problem. They think that their relevancy is good enough, for the amount of documents that we have on the web now and the amount of documents that we're going to have in 5-10 years. They realized that the algorithm that these other companies were using really wasn't, sufficient. So what they did was they realized that there was a little bit of structure on the web that they could capitalize on, and they did. Their algorithm exploited that bit of structure, and suffice to say that that algorithm gave them the competitive advantage over these other search companies to draw in customers, to draw in site visitors, because their relevancy was better than the relevancy of their competitors. So like I said, its algorithm capitalized on a bit of structure available on the web, the hyperlink. And one thing that's interesting to note about the hyperlink is that web developers put that bit of information in their pages in almost a selfish manner. Why do I say selfish? Because it was very self-serving. They had to make sure that that hyperlink made it possible for their site visitors to navigate around their website. Without really any extra effort, people created websites with this structured information. Really, it was useful primarily and exclusively, actually, for human beings. They wanted people coming to the websites to be able to navigate around. And ultimately, it really didn't require much skill to do this, right? Average web developer who knows HTML understands how to put hyperlinks in a web page, make their website navigable, and that's really the end of the story. It didn't require a degree in rocket science to do it. So looking at that, really, for me, makes me ask the question, what would happen? What would happen if we could transparently put more structure into our existing web documents? What if we could do it with little or no effort? Are there more examples? Are there more examples of structure out there found on today's web pages? There really isn't many. So like I said, browsers forgivingly render HTML. What's interesting about that is when we think about structure on the web, oftentimes the discussion will include XML. Primarily because, we've been told that XML plays well with the web. It's a markup language. You can embed markup languages in markup languages. And if that's the case, within the context of the browser, I ask the question, where is it? There really is no XML within the context of the browser, looking at the large, landscape that is the World Wide Web. The reality is XML has been very successful on the internet. So you've got web services, you've got RSS, you've got Atom, you've got down the line. XML, no doubt, has been successful on the internet. But it has largely failed within the context of the browser. And that's because of two very specific things. So, web applications that fail to deliver structure, web applications often fail to deliver structure that's found implicitly in the databases behind the website. So what do I mean by that? Consider this very, very common case. You go to something like Amazon, right? Amazon has these wonderful databases filled with structured data, tables and tables and tables of user information and, book information and user reviews. And all of that is nicely structured. What does their web application do? And I'm not criticizing Amazon clearly because this is just the way things are done. Web applications will take that data, turn it into HTML, ship it out to the browser, and all of that structure that was implicitly found in that database is lost in the context of the browser. So let's take the flip side. Okay, let's say there is a web application out there that does deliver structure to the browser. I'm going to look at myself for this one. So my company authors a MathML authoring tool. So it lets people who want to include scientific notation in their content bring up this nice, easy-to-use authoring tool. It embeds that information, and it stores the information as MathML inside the system. So we have two options at that point. If we want to ship that equation into a web page, we either take the approach that I just described and we take that nice structure and we render it out as, say, a GIF or a JPEG, something that all browsers understand, or we take that XML and we ship it right in the browser. In that case, what happens? It means my browser needs to understand what to do with it. It means my browser has to know implicitly, out of the box, how to take that XML and render it. The reality is web browsers are ill-prepared to handle these various custom XML formats, right? Because if you think about it, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if I have a text reader? What if I'm coming to a website and I'm blind. I don't have the ability to see this equation. What is my text reader going to do? How is it going to handle it? So there are a lot of problems implicit with trying to render all these custom XML formats that are embedded within the browser. So the reality is it requires, from the browser standpoint, built-in knowledge, right? So my browser is Firefox and it ships with MathML support. Or my browser is Internet Explorer and I have to install the MathML plugin. Neither is really a viable solution for the common case. If I'm going to say there's really going to be all the structure defined in web pages, does it make sense for me to require my site visitors to install various plugins? No, it really doesn't. I don't want to require people coming to my website to go download some third-party plugin in the common case to see my content. So how do we overcome these hurdles? Really, what I've done up to now is really frame the problem. the community has been thinking about this for a very long time. And what's interesting and what's happening now is that a number of solutions are stepping up to solve this very problem that I've described. So here are some of the emerging trends in delivering structured content to the browser. What I'm going to do over the next few slides is talk about each of these. I'm going to primarily focus on microformats because microformats, as I'll talk about, have really been gaining a lot of momentum, and there's been a lot of discussion about them. RDFA is I don't want to call it a competing technology, but it's a technology that really is evolving because of a lot of the movements in the microformat camp. One of the other things I'm going to talk about is structured blogging. You may have heard about it. In fact, when I was talking to people about this presentation, they'd asked about structured blogging, so I explicitly added it in as one of the 3 bullet points here. So, the approach that the microformat camp takes really boils down to a number of core principles. One of the first principles is there are many, many more web authors, webmasters out there that can write HTML, XHTML, and CSS than can write something, a little more complicated like XML, transforming that XML using XSLT, understanding how to validate an XML document against a DTD, a document type definition, or an XSD, an XML schema. Oftentimes, the average web developer barely even knows what those acronyms mean. And as the size of the web grows, you've got to actually ask yourself, what is the level of technical sophistication that the average web developer is going to have? Because the reality is, as the web grows, more people are going to get on and get involved. And some people are arguing that if you look at the average level of technical sophistication of the web developer, it's going to be moderate. It isn't going to be a bunch of people with masters in computer science degrees in master's degrees in computer science. They're going to be people who have a passion and an interest in technology. They're going to jump right in, and they're going to learn on the fly. And that's not to say there aren't web developers who understand these things. Absolutely, there absolutely are. But if you look at the general trends, most web developers understand XHTML, HTML, and CSS. So the microformats camp says, why not use technology that is already widely adopted, understood, supported by browsers, so it doesn't require any plugins, doesn't run into the problems that I was just talking about, and uses agreed upon standards that are already out there, understood, and agreed upon. So let me show you what a microformat looks like from under the hood. So you remember before I talked about semi-structured documents. A semi-structured document, just to quickly recap, was a document that is mostly unstructured but contains bits of structured information within it. Here's an example of a microformat that is used to talk about a piece of information that is a contact. So I've got the name Tantek Selik, CTO Technorati, up on the screen. And Tantek Selik is one of the main forces behind the microformats movement. It's a very grassroots organization, but he is at the forefront in terms of talking about it and organizing. So if I were to have a web page that has him on it, what would the markup look like? So I might use these very standard HTML, XHTML attributes. I have an address element. I'm using a link. I'm using some spans. You can see in my A element that I've got an href there. Very, very, very standard stuff. Now, if I'm a web developer and I want to style this information, what am I going to use? I'm going to use class information. I'm going to use CSS to define the presentation of my content. So here I have class information. At the top you can see where his name is, that I have class is given name, last name is family name, he has a title, and there's an organization here. So there's really nothing, I'm really not going out of my way to do anything different than I normally would. But really what's happening here is there's a convention that's being established. And ultimately, that's it. That is just a microformat. Now, is there anything, really revolutionary about this? No. Really no. There is no change the world philosophy behind microformats. They are ultimately layered into existing structures and behaviors of content creators. So what does that mean? It means that people are already doing this. It really just says, let's agree on the way we do this. People understand these technologies. Let's just agree on the way we use it. So just to reiterate, it is really just XHTML, CSS, nothing new. It's not creating a new standard. It's just saying within the context of those standards, let's do these things in this particular way. One of the core principles here that the microformats camp talks about is that since they looked at the existing behaviors that web developers use, that they're really, truly designed for humans first. Just like that hyperlink. Think back to that hyperlink example. So the hyperlink was not designed for a machine. It was designed for humans, so humans can navigate around a website. Likewise, microformats are designed for humans first. Secondly, machines can use them. What does that mean? It means that, an example of how a machine could use it, spidering content on web pages. So you could imagine how nice it would be from a search engine perspective to, while you're spidering a page, to look for these little cues that say, hey, there's a little bit of structure in this page. I can understand now that this is a person. This is the organization to which that person belongs. This is the title that that person has. And like I've been saying all along, they're built upon adopted standards. So what are the other examples? What formats? So I just talked about a microformat called an H card, which represents an address book contact. Reality is there are many different types. There's events, contacts, go down the list, reviews, a book review, a technology, a gadget review. And what's interesting to note is that you're not going to see this list grow astronomically. And the reality, and the reason for that is because the whole microformat principle is based around solving the common case, not these general cases. They really focus on solving the common case, looking at the types of content that people are talking about on the web and putting structure around it. So are you going to see, so going back to my MathML example, are you going to see a microformat for representing complicated mathematical equations? I would guess not. They might surprise me, but I would guess not. So what about authoring tools? So there are tools that people have created, are creating, and are planning on creating that will create these formats without you even having to know about them. The example that you're looking at right here is an example from the content management system that my company produces. We have an environment where people are inputting structured information, bits of structured information. For this example here, it's a book review. So somebody's entering the name of the book, the author, etc. And when that information is being published out onto the web, that markup that I showed you in the previous slide is being embedded into the web page without the person who's authoring it even having to know anything about the details or even the benefit of it or really even anything about it. Browsers coming to that website don't have to have a plugin. It's just standard HTML, standard stuff that browsers already do. So there are a lot of tools out there that are picking up on this. So like I talked about, CMS tools, open source tools such as Drupal and Midgard are examples of CMS authoring environments that are taking the information embedded within them and at display time, at publish time, taking that information and putting that little bit of semantic markup around it. Blog publishing tools. So it's not just the concept of a web page that this is relevant to, but blog posts. There are blog publishing tools such as WordPress, Movable Type, go down the line, that have either built-in knowledge of microformats or have a very rich community around them for building plugins. So for example, WordPress has a huge community building plugins. And if you go to, I think it's wpplugins.net, there is an example of hundreds of plugins on that, and there's some subset there that are used for rendering out microformats. Number of different utilities. There's an HCard creator. So the example that I was just showing you that had the contact information for Tantec, that can be generated by using a tool. So here's an example of HCard creator. This is something that you can just find online by just doing a search for HCard creator. And you type in your name, so Bill Kava. You can see over on the right-hand side here that it's building up my information. My company is Ectron, city, street, etc. Fill as much or as little out of it as you want. Etc. So, I can take this now if I didn't want to have to go through the hoops of, knowing which class name to use. I can just copy and paste that right into my blog if I wanted to. And I can say for certain that a number of these CMS publishing tools are making it so that you don't even have to, copy and paste code. It's really built into the CMS itself. So you can imagine a number of things here. You can really imagine the kind of applications that could be used to publish the information, but you can also imagine the kinds of applications that could be used to extract that information. And I'm going to talk about some of those next. Yahoo Tech. Yahoo Tech is now publishing their information for their technology reviews using HCard. Yahoo Local is publishing their information for local listings using HCard. There's a great event sharing site called Upcoming. They're using HCalendar. There's another one, Edgeo, that's publishing their information regarding the listings that they have as HListing. And Technorati, which is a blog search engine, actually has a microformat search. That's not surprising, considering that Tantec is the CTO or the chief technologist for Technorati. So some interesting things to watch on the Technorati side with regards to microformat support. But it goes beyond that. And there are interesting applications popping up, almost weekly, daily, during the busy times. And, I'm going to go into two demos next. But before I do that, I'm just curious, a show of hands, has anybody heard of Live Clipboard? Does anybody know what Live Clipboard is? Okay, so let me talk about that for a little bit. So let me bring up a demo that I have. Okay. So I'm doing this on the fly here, so let's see how lucky I am. Here's an example of a web page that has contact information in it. Okay? And you can see here, it's saying that it's outputting the information using HCard. So this is a demo that Ray Ozzie, who is the chief technologist at Microsoft, put together at the Emerging Technologies Conference last year. It's a technology conference, showcases innovative new technology that's put on by Tim O'Reilly. And he fired up Firefox and showed this demo using Firefox to prove that it wasn't some behind-the-scenes IE magic at play. But he just showed how you could, right-click using standard browser technology. This is no plugin in play here. I could just right-click. I could do copy. I could right-click, and I can do paste. Right? So that's just showing transferring data from a little bit of structured information from the web to the web. He then went on to talk about, well, geez, that was neat. That showed how I could take structured information from one website. This was in the context of one website. But the fundamental concept is that you could take content from one website using the same mechanism, using the clipboard on the machine as the data transfer point. So when I did right-click copy, I took that little bit of HCard information, that little bit of structured information, saved it to my clipboard, and when I did a paste, it pasted it back in. Imagine how you could use that from website to website. He then took it a step further and said, well, if I can do this, why can't I use the clipboard as a means for getting information from the web to my desktop? So the example that he did next was he right-clicked, copied, and showed going into Outlook doing a paste. And that contact information went directly into his contacts. The way he did that was he had a little application running on his desktop that just monitored the clipboard. And so anytime that this little application detected that structured information in HCard in there, what it did was it translated it into an accepted standard that Outlook uses, which is iCal. So what it did was it detected that, translated it, so when he went to do a paste into Outlook, effectively in the clipboard really was iCal, and so Outlook knows how to handle that. So he showed transferring data from the web to the desktop very seamlessly, very seamlessly. And that was just one example that really wowed people on the power of what can come out, what technologies can come about when we start to embed structure within the context of web applications. So I'm going to show another demo here of an application that capitalizes on structure. So I went to, this is Firefox. I installed an extension for Firefox that's called Your Minis. And what Your Minis does is it looks at the content within the page for those types of structure. So the site that I'm at right now is called Barcamp, barcamp.org. And what Barcamp is if you're not familiar with it, it's a conference group that's very much self-organizing. Anybody can speak at it. They pop up all around the country. Here's some examples of different Barcamps that are going around. And you'll see right here there's a section called What's New. The information that is put on this page is embedded in HCard. So if I go over to the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that there's this little icon that says it detected that there are 2 RSS feeds and 39 events. Well, if I click on that, you can see that it brought up a little dashboard here that is rendering the structured information within this nice, graphical interface. I hover over these pieces of information, and you can see that the details are coming up. But if I click on it, you can see that it's asking me what to do. I'm going to open it. Oh. Outlook's taking a while to open, so I'm just going to skip that part. But suffice to say, what it's going to do is open up that contact information and import it directly, once I give it authority to, right into my contacts, or I'm sorry, right into my calendar. So I'm going to hide all these things. And I'm going to show you one last example right from Tontech's website. This is his personal blog, and what you can see over here is he's got an events section, and these are events that he's speaking at. So you can see right here there's a link that says subscribe to these events in any application that supports a particular standard. So what you can do is you can click on this. What will happen is if you have a calendaring application that supports it, is that it will automatically subscribe to all the events on that page. So what that means is it'll import those events into my calendar, and anytime the events are updated on this page, if I've given the application the authority to do so, my calendar will update automatically. So what an amazing way if I'm somebody who's involved in my local community, I've got kids, and I'm going to the YMCA for swimming lessons, and I want to keep in constant update of the different events or different programs that the YMCA has. You can imagine a point where YMCA would be publishing out their information using a little bit of structured information and being able to subscribe to that and being notified immediately within the tools that I'm already using of the events that are happening. So let me minimize this. So I lied. I said that was the last one. I'm going to show one last one. Oops. Microformat search. Okay. Here's an example of Technorati, who implemented a microformat search. So you can say that, enter in your search text here and search within a particular type of structured information. So I could search for, Ray Ozzie. And I could look in contacts. And you can see that I'm getting hits back that contain Ray Ozzie, but it's not just containing Ray Ozzie. It's actually containing Ray Ozzie, containing an H card for Ray Ozzie. You can also see that you can search for a review. So you can imagine searching for, I could type in Oprah Winfrey here, and I'd get a review, maybe, somebody who had published a book review for one of Oprah's, Book of the Month Club things. That would show up here rather than just every page on the internet that talks about Oprah Winfrey, or getting back, the Wikipedia entry for Oprah Winfrey, or Oprah Winfrey's homepage, or Oprah Winfrey magazine subscriptions. I'm really, segmenting the kind of data that I want back. So if you're feeling unsure of this, right, think of a couple things. There's Pareto's rule. Pareto's rule is, solve the common case. It's the 80-20 rule. If you work with me, you're going to hear me talk about simplicity and the 80-20 rule all the time. The reality is microformats is trying to do that. They're saying 20% of the effort solves 80% of the problem. They're not trying to solve the 99% of the problem. They're not trying to solve 100% of the problem. They're saying the problems that people are commonly trying to solve, let's come up with a solution for that. Consider the state of webpox. Webpox is not a disease. Pox is plain old XML. What is the state of plain old XML within the context of the browser now? Right? It's just not there. Bill Gates announced at a developer conference, basically that we need microformats. So if you think it's just exclusively tied to some kind of small grassroots community exclusively, it's not. It's really reached the highest level of the largest software company that we have right now. You can come up with your own format. So if you're trying to represent some structured information, you can jump in and contribute. It's not something that's being developed by a standards committee behind closed doors. It's something that anybody really can contribute. Like I said, the browser support is already there. So, like I said, the bulk of this presentation was on microformats, but there are some other trends out there. RDFA is very, very similar to microformats to a certain degree. On the surface, the two systems are remarkably similar. They both have the same goal of trying to encode some structure into the documents as we know them right now on the web. But the approach for handling the problem, the approach really differs between the two. Microformats, as I've been explaining, is a grassroots movement. The RDFA movement is being chartered by the W3. So it's a very much more rigorous standard. It's very much being designed by a committee in response to a lot of what has happened in the microformats community. So here's an example. So you can see, there's a bit of information here, and it's kind of hard to see on this slide, but let me see if I can select it. No. But there is some markup information, just like we saw the microformat, that gives some semantic information to the content that you're talking about. There are a number of resources available right now that are particularly good. One is rdfa.info. It's a blog that is being led by the two founders of the RDFA standard. And I have another link in here to the RDFA primer itself. What I like to think about, RDFA is really microformats with more rigor, microformats with more standards. Everything that people complain about with regards to microformats is something that RDFA is trying to solve. One of the things that people often say is, oh, there's no namespaces. There's going to be a collision. How do you know that somebody who's talking about one thing isn't going to conflict with a term that somebody else chooses to use when you're talking about microformats? Well, RDFA is an attempt adding a little more of the formalism that people who are more comfortable and more familiar with within the XML world, to the problem. I'm not going to talk about, I'm running a little long on time, so I'm not going to talk about Griddle or eRDF, but they're very much new trends, new technologies that are trying to solve similar problems. Structured blogging, I'm going to talk about for a few sentences because somebody asked me about it today. But structured blogging isn't an enabling technology from what's a better way to say it? It isn't really a format. It isn't like microformats or RDFA. What it is a number of agreed upon forms that people use when they're publishing blogs, so that if somebody's publishing a book review in a blog, it'll have a standard form input. It'll be published out in a way that's recognizable as a book review. But unfortunately, what happened with structured blogging is it was started by a company that was very popular in the syndication world syndication search world, which was PubSub. PubSub went under over the past year, and along with it, structured blogging really lost a lot of its momentum. Last thing I'm going to talk about is natural language processing. Some people say, hey, we speak English, we speak languages, we speak natural languages. The content that we deliver on the web, even if it is unstructured, is being put into web pages in a language that we speak. So theoretically, we should be able to have machines understand that content. If we can make smart enough machines, we can make machines that can understand English, understand natural languages. So truly, the structure is implicit in the natural language that we're speaking. So to that I say, awesome idea, very cool, but probably not something that we're going to be using within the next year, 2 years, maybe even 5 years in any real sense. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour I wanted to give about structured content, the trends in structured content, what's happening, the kinds of applications that we're starting to see now, what companies are talking about it, and I open up the floor to any questions if you guys have it, and I thank you very much for your time.